Hello. Good afternoon, good morning to some of you, good evening to others, and welcome to our session this morning. This afternoon, we'll be talking about building your social capital, your network, and creating mentoring relationships. I have the honor to say that I have not only mentors and women in my life who shape who I am on a daily basis, both personally and professionally, but also I have the honor of calling them my friends. And so when someone invites me to do something like this, to have these meaningful conversations that can help other women, I'm always glad to call the folks that I value and I turn to build my own social capital and sort of guide my own thinking. So I'm going to take the time to have them introduce themselves. And I'll start by saying my name is Brenda Jimenez. I am the CEO of Mentor New York. I am your facilitator for this session today. And I am joined by these wonderful women, and I will have Cicy kick us off and introduce herself.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda. I'm really delighted to be here, and a good morning or a good afternoon to everyone who's joining. I'm Cicy George. I'm a senior leadership development designer and architect at Macy's Incorporated. I've had a number of experiences over my 20+ year career, and I've met some really amazing women. And, I've had the pleasure of, not only working with and getting to know Brenda, but also forming a relationship with her, as well as Alana and Liz. And I'm really passionate about leadership development and inspiring other people to move past their potential and to unleash their greatness. So with that, I'll hand it over to Alana.
Thank you, Cicy, and thank you, Brenda, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure. My name is Alana Beard. I am the founder and president of the 318 Foundation, where it's our mission to close opportunity gaps for girls in historically underserved communities, whether it's through mentorship, sports, or life-changing experiences. Prior to founding the 318 Foundation, I played 15 years in the WNBA, where I spent 8 years or so in Washington, D.C. with the Washington Mystics, and I ended my career with the Los Angeles Sparks. I'll pass it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elena. And thank you, Brenda and Cicy, for the introduction and for being here. My name is Elizabeth, or Liz Santiago, and I am the founder of an organization called the Untold Narratives. And my mission in life is to support underheard or underrepresented voices through storytelling and mentoring, coaching, all of that. And prior to my work with the Untold Narratives, I was the chief program officer at Mentor National, which is where I got to know Brenda very well, and it helped me to hone in on my passion for mentoring and working with other folks in the field and learning from them. Mentoring has helped me to publish a young adult novel, which has just recently come out, and that I'm excited about. And I'll tell you more about that later. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So everyone who's joined us, we would love to know who you are and where you're sort of joining us from. So in the chat, make sure to say hello, tell us where you're coming in from. And as we start engaging in this conversation about social capital and mentoring, let us know what you're thinking and what questions you want to be asking. So I think one of the things, as I was looking at having this conversation, it makes you become really self-reflective about your own social capital, your own mentoring experiences professionally. As someone who's always talking about mentoring for young people ages 7 to 24 years old, sometimes it's very easy to try to look and seek for mentors for other people and forget that you yourself need to pour into your own development and have those mentoring experiences. When I think of each of you and how we have met throughout the last, little less than 6 or 7 years, it's all been through interesting, realities, some that are really obvious and some that are not. And what I would say is that each time I was surprised because you each have pushed me to think about what I needed at the time professionally, but also what you were seeking professionally and how I could be able to help along in that journey. And so I started to wonder, and I'll open this up for all of you, when we talk about social capital, as far as research shows, women cannot advance their careers because there's a lack of social capital in around the spaces that can move them and their trajectories in their career and their professions. You all have very distinct careers. They're very diverse, and yet it's still, we're all in these same 4 boxes somehow. And it hasn't been by accident, sort of by design. So let's talk a little bit about, how are you building social capital when sometimes all your capital is your immediate family and friends? How do you go past that to get to where you and I are here today? And I'll give it to Alana.
Of course you will, Brenda. No, but I just think for me, I've been very fortunate throughout sort of my journey of having a mentor, individuals who have poured into me sort of along the way. And it's simply because of sports, right? I started playing the game of basketball when I was 8 or 9, but started playing organized basketball at the age of 12. And at every point along my journey, I had a coach, whether there's an assistant coach or a school administrator or a teammate who was older than me, who kind of took the time to pour into me because they saw sort of the desire and determination I had as an athlete to ultimately be great. But it wasn't until I made the transition to life after the game. I officially retired after the WNBA, after my WNBA career in January of 2020, in which I transitioned to the venture capital space. And I can recall one of my first sort of big meetings at Silicon Valley Bank was walking into this boardroom. I'm sitting around the table with about 30 to 35 people. And I look around this table and no one looked like me. And that kind of, it blew my mind. But I immediately started to figure out like who in this room can help me sort of navigate this new space. And it was daunting. It was frustrating because I guess if you understand sort of the venture capital space, you understand that it's predominantly 90% white male. And not that it's a negative, but it was my capital. It was my social capital at that time. And I was in the process of really just trying to understand where I can find individuals that look like me. And that became hard. But I think it's really important to just really lock into the individuals that you want to support versus them supporting you. And then you'll get everything that you need in return. And that's always kind of been my MO.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that because that was so beautifully said, and I feel exactly the same way. I had a bit of a non-traditional background or entrance into the executive space in the sense that I left high school before graduating. And so that marked for me a lot of my identity in terms of like trying to navigate space and figure out like, do I tell folks that, I didn't actually graduate high school traditionally, or do I, how do I enter into this space? And it was the same sort of idea. I always found people who were either like-minded or who kind of, I felt like I could trust and share things with, and we would strategize around, well, you're really good at this. Why don't we focus on this? Or present yourself in this way, which was always a challenge. Just trying to figure out the right ways to enter a space. And so that's something that I think over the years, I've learned more and more in connecting with those folks who either look like me or have similar experiences or who've entered the space in maybe not the traditional ways, has always been such a plus or really helpful.
I think I'll add another perspective to what Alana and Liz are talking here. So growing up in a South Asian household, I was raised with, you don't talk about yourself. You keep your head down, you do the work, and magically someone in the universe will take notice of you. So the idea of having social capital and then networking and growing that network and tapping into that network to help you grow was really a foreign concept for me. And to be honest, it wasn't something until I learned later on in my career that you have to do this. If you have certain goals that you would like to achieve, if there are dreams that you really want to go after, you can't do that alone, and you can't do that in a vacuum. So even the way that I met Brenda, I still remember that day so vividly. I know she does too, because actually it was right before the pandemic. And I started, this was February of 2020. And I think that year I just sort of said to myself, I have to go out and do things differently, right? Different from what I was used to culturally, that is. So I was offered the opportunity to attend a networking for women breakfast at the local university, and that's where I met Brenda. And she spoke so passionately about mentoring and her experiences. And there was something that she said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you remember, she was talking about don't let bitter become your accessory. And she was talking about that in the context of, maybe if you're not seeing promotion happening, or if you're not getting the growth or the opportunities you're looking for, don't let the bitterness of not getting that become your accessory. So I walked up to her after the breakfast and I said, hey, I really liked what you said. I work on a lot of mentoring type initiatives and programs. We should connect. And we developed a completely virtual mentoring relationship over the course of a couple of years. And we actually didn't meet face to face until last year, to be honest. So we've had a completely virtual relationship. But I think, so in terms of going back to your question, Brenda, and using social capital, building that to leverage and reach success, I think it starts with changing your mindset and being open to let it happen. And then also seeking out those ways. Some of the other ways I've tried to do that is joining organizations that I feel a common passion and share a vision with, or even just asking people in my network, hey, I'm really interested about this, or I really want to do that. Is there anyone in your network that you can make a connection or an introduction to that I can talk to that person? So even so, it does require effort, but we know that, the journey, it's all about the journey, right? And if it's something that we're really passionate about and we really want to pursue, then the effort, definitely has to, come into the forefront.
Yeah, I love that. And thanks for sharing that story. Bitter is an ugly albatross. It's never a cute necklace, I tell you. And women get there really quickly, right? Because our social capital a lot of times is the perception is that it will happen in the workplace for you, that you will find those individuals in the workplace. And I think one of the things that you all are distinctly sort of identifying for everyone is that it doesn't. The level of intentionality and courage that you have to be able to say, hey, I'm thinking about this. I need some guidance. I would love to pick your brain or help me get to the other side of this vision I have is a really important part of it. And it's hard because asking for help is not always either culturally or traditionally what's in our wheelhouse, right? And when you're at work, asking for help may have consequences, right? Because there is a culture and a society in the workplace. And so how do you do that outside of that so that you're building and then you could go back into the workplace to actually make those things happen? And what I tell women often is you've got to go beyond those walls, because if you stay in those walls, you can easily become bitter and then you marginalize your opportunities, right? And I think that that's a really important part of what you are all talking about, the realization of, wait, I'm the only, or wait, I'm stuck, or wait, I need to have people who are more like-minded than I am to be able to pursue. But in each of my relationships with each one of you, either one of us has come and said, I need to figure this out. I think you might be the person to help me do that. And that courage and that exchange is what creates, right, the opportunity for the capital to be built. But then this other thing starts to happen that I want to talk about, because that is super hard, especially if you're an alpha type or you're super organized or you're in an environment where it's required. What is it that movie, A League of Their Own? I'm aging myself, with Tom Hanks, and one of the women starts crying in the baseball field. He says, "There's no crying in baseball," right? And it's like, well, you can't show your weakness or cry in, certain spaces. And sometimes work doesn't allow for that vulnerability to occur. So talk to me a little bit about the fight you're having with yourself in the asking for help and becoming vulnerable to understand what it is that you need, and then having the courage to pursue it, because that's the nuance of social capital and mentoring that no one really talks about.
Yeah, I can definitely jump in, and just to your point, Brenda, and you as well, CC, asking for help has probably been one of the biggest transitions for me, just because of how I was built or raised, just in our household, but also just as an athlete, you're just taught to get through things. And so when I have sort of these conversations with other athletes, I encourage them to be as vulnerable as possible in these moments, because there's no way for people to really understand who you are and what you're going through and what your desires are if you don't, speak about them. And, that's probably one of my favorite lines, Brenda, is that there's no crying in baseball, right? Or there's no crying in this household, because that was something that, my parents, constantly instilled in us. And so it was a huge transition for me, just, navigating outside of the walls of just basketball in general. But I just think it's just really important to, as I mentioned, talk about the challenges that you're having and being okay and sort of discussing those openly, especially in a safe space such as this, but also with mentors, such as Brenda and others that I have. One thing that someone, mentioned to me is that it's impossible for me to know who you are, what you want, and what you want to do if you don't let me know. And that's something that I've become very confident and comfortable in doing, although it is a work in process, or in progress on a daily basis. So
I love that. And I think I'll add a little Jenga on top of that. I think it starts with, again, being open and having that mindset of, it's okay to ask. If you don't know something, it's okay to ask. And obviously the people that you're choosing to ask for that help, it all starts with having a trusting foundation. Trust is at the very, very core and the crux of it all. If you don't have a safe space where you feel like you can be vulnerable to ask for help and to share what you're going after, then that conversation will never happen. So it really does start with having that trust as a foundation of any kind of environment, and being open to the process. And I think being open to the process, for me, it was not something that I quickly learned. I had to recently become more and more comfortable with that. And I say that because, sometimes we might feel, if I ask for help, people will think that I'm not smart enough, or I'm not competent enough, or I'm not capable enough. It's always, I won't look like I'm enough, but I know I am. And I've only gotten more recently comfortable with feeling like I am enough. And actually, I feel like I have a hidden greatness that I have yet to unleash. So that's just a realization I feel like I've come into in my now early 40s. And it's taken me a long time to get here. And even just to admit that in a global forum, that I'm in my early 40s and I'm just learning some of these lessons now that I wish I had learned earlier on in my life and in my career. So I think it starts with trust, having an open mindset, and letting the process happen, letting the opportunity happen. Because again, to Elena's point, if you don't ask, they're not going to know. No one is a mind reader. And if it's something you're really passionate about and you want to achieve, you have to ask, you have to put it out into the ethos and let it manifest. And of course, put the work in.
Yeah, I mean, I love where this conversation is going. And thank you, Cicy, for being vulnerable about that, because I have to say that I also just realizing or learning this now, or later in my life, I should say, or later in my career, that you have to be vulnerable, within reason. Like we're not talking about sharing your entire life story, but part of it for me is where storytelling comes in, because as I look back at my life and my career and all the things that have happened and led me to where I am, there's so many people involved, so many stories, so many ways to that I've asked for help over the years, that I often share those experiences, or share an anecdote about something. And usually that helps someone else come forward and just say, hey, I had a similar experience, or, oh, what happened when you did that? Because sometimes it doesn't always come into a positive conclusion, let's put it that way, but it's always a learning experience. So I've learned over the years to ask for help, as scary as it is, as vulnerable as it is, as all the head noise around, I'm not going to look good if I ask for help. It's not, I've learned that that's not necessary anymore, but like it is helpful to share that, because then others who are sort of struggling with feeling that way might feel like, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. So it's just cool.
Yeah. And to add to that, Elizabeth, I think one of the challenges in asking for help, especially as women, is that we feel like we have to have it 100% figured out. And I can speak just from my perspective in that I'm a type A. There's no such thing as perfect, but I strive for perfection in everything that I do, right? I can bring up a current situation right now in that I am in the process of pursuing sort of the expansion rights to a WNBA team in Oakland. And so I'm the one that's leading this and pulling together an ownership group. My initial reaction to this process is just to do the work, right? And then when I have a finished product, that's when we'll talk about it. That's when we'll announce it. But I've been forced outside of my comfort zone to just really speak on sort of my desire or passion to, one, get involved in women's sports, two, to be in an ownership group, three, to change what the profile of what a sports ownership or group or person or individual look like, right? And so having to, really speak on that publicly has been a challenge for me, but at the end of the day, it was needed, because again, you have to ask for what you want, and you have to also understand that it's bigger than you, right? I'm not in this for me. I'm in this because I understand the platform that I have, and I understand that I have to be that voice for others who don't necessarily have it. So when you think outside of the box in that sense, that's when things just really start to make sense and move forward for you.
And I love that, because one of the things that I've been reading about lately, I'm reading this great book called Power Code, and how women redefine power, because we don't feel like we want to pursue control and power over people and things, but we want to use our power to move and fluctuate things forward for the greater good of community and the things we want to nurture and aspire for others to have around us. And that doesn't mean we don't want success for ourselves, and we don't want to make money along the way, and we don't want to have some level of power and authority over things, but it does have this greater end goal along the way. And so it's really important that you understand that your vulnerability is part and parcel of this greater good that you're trying to accomplish when you're putting out your product or your brand, or you're moving forward a nonprofit, or you're trying to make community change, or you're doing political advocacy or social justice, right? And I think that that's a really important part of this conversation, that it's your social capital, it's those networks, it's asking for help, it's being an advocate for the things that you want to aspire to see happen in the world, that becomes the power that you're generating through different people to move it forward. And I think that's the part that is really important in this process. The other thing I will say is that this morning, all of you keep mentioning me as a mentor, and that's always something that's really, humbling for me, and it's never coincide in my mind with how things happen, because, when any of these wonderful women or any woman comes to me to ask for help, they're not saying, I need you to be my mentor. It's not the way in which I walk into the scenario. My job is to do what I think I'm called upon to do when someone asks me to help. It's to help you, right? And so I use whatever resources or any little thing that might be available to actually be able to provide that to individuals. And I never think I have much to give, but like the true Puerto Rican woman I have. If there's enough for me to eat, there's enough for 10 to eat. And so I share. But I want to talk a little bit about this journey where people tell everyone, well, you have to find your mentor. You have to get mentors. And I think that it's not this really straight line. I don't think everybody came to me and was like, ooh, that's my next mentor, right? I think we all had some intentional exchanges that happened. And if you were to ask me, who is your mentee? I can't give you that list, because I always think that, especially with the professional adults I have, it is a gift when I walk into a room and Cicy decides to identify me as that person. So I would rarely walk around and be like, oh yeah, I'm a mentor, because that's just not what I do. And often when I talk to women who are really experienced, they'll tell me, when people ask me to be my mentor, it's overwhelming. Their mentor, it's overwhelming because I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, which they are. But I think the title itself sometimes gives this massive thing, or a feeling to the individual that has the accountability to do this role. So how do you find your mentors? How do you even identify that they're your mentors while you're doing this work?
You know, I think the best mentoring relationships are very organic. You know, how many companies out there try to implement a mentoring program and they use some kind of special algorithm and a secret sauce for pairing, essentially arranged marrying two people, saying, here, go off, have a mentoring relationship, have a nice time. It doesn't always work like that, because two people on paper might look like they fit, but you never really know the chemistry until you start speaking to one another. I think with Brenda and I, we just had a very natural chemistry. And over time, after one conversation after another, I think it eventually turned into a mentoring relationship, sometimes even maybe a peer mentoring relationship or a reverse mentoring relationship. I think it's evolved from our initial conversations that we've had. And I think for me, when I'm walking into a room and just say, for example, I'm networking, I'm not necessarily looking around the room and going, oh, that person could be the next mentor, the next big thing, the next target. I'm looking at, you know, who can I start some connection with, and just, again, trying to leave myself open for whatever happens and let whatever opportunities come from that connection and that initial networking and introduction. So I go back to, I think mentoring relationships have to be organic, and they have to, if it's supposed to be, it'll develop into a mentoring relationship, you know, over time. Not to say that you can't go into a relationship, you know, with some type of intention, right? So if you go to a networking event, you know, a lot of times what I tell people, if you're going to walk into a networking event, what is your intention behind attending? Are you looking to just make connections and broaden your network? Are you looking to possibly meet people who maybe could lead into a mentorship relationship or a sponsor relationship? What is your intention? So when I go into networking events or any kind of potential meeting other people event, I'm trying to go in just to broaden my network and see who I can make a connection with, who I can collaborate on a fun, special project with. And if that should turn into something else, that's sort of like a bonus, right? A cherry on top of the cake. But I think when you think about, you know, the next time you're invited for a networking event or some kind of gathering, have an intention behind that. And then as an aside, I think also the best relationships happen when it's organic, it starts organically and you show up authentically.
Yeah, I agree completely with that, Cicy. And I was thinking to add on to the intentionality piece. Like sometimes I walk into a space and sort of similar to how I met Brenda, I saw someone who I was like, ooh, you know, she has something that I aspire to be, or a confidence that I would like to figure out how I can also get to that point. And so with that intentionality, and on top of us both being Puerto Rican, I was like, oh, I want to get to know her and see if there's a connection. So it is organic after that. But in my mind, I was like, wait a minute, I see something here that I want to get to know, because I do think that there is a synergy, or there could be synergy, because I see similarities in some of the things that we're doing, or career-wise, like, she's here and maybe I can, learn a little bit how to get there as well. So I think that there's that piece of the intentionality as well. And so I definitely appreciate how you describe that. I think it's great.
I'm very similar in thought to the both of you. Every sort of engagement or introduction, I approach it with the intent of listening and learning as much as possible about the individual that I'm engaging with. And I wrote a little note here in that my friends are my mentors, and that's how I approach it. We don't seek we don't go out and pinpoint someone within a room that we want to mentor us. I'm big on sort of vibes. I'm big on energy. I'm big on sort of connections. And if we connect in a way, if I feel like I can be beneficial to you from a friend perspective, that's how I usually identify my friends. A lot of my friends that I sort of went to college with always joke with me, and they say that, Alana, you have, if I thought about sort of your friend circle, I would say that age ranges, you probably have more friends in sort of the 70 to 80 age range than you do sort of your own age range. But that's kind of me, in that I feel like I am always in search for information. And there's no one better to give that to you than individuals who have lived this life long before you, have gone through sort of different experiences or the same experiences that you are seeking to go through. And so everything that I do is just from an authentic and very genuine perspective. And it could very well be an Achilles heel for me, because I think I could have gotten a lot of things done a lot sooner than I kind of envisioned it. But it's about the people that I engage with and the people that I sort of bring into sort of my space. That's more interesting to me.
No, I appreciate that. I think to your point, Alana, a lot of my mentors, if I looked at them, are in that 60 to 80 range. It's only been recent that, like, my mom often says, oh, you're hanging out with people your age now. And so it has been interesting to, what do you value? Wisdom? What do you value? The immediacy of knowing what's in the now. What do you need at that moment? And being able to measure that and continuously seeking it and asking for it in a way that's intentional. But I think, if you looked at all the research and mentoring and everything that everyone says makes a mentoring relationship work, you have to have a party who's willing to see you, who's willing to listen to you, and who's curious about not only who you are, but then vulnerable enough to share who they are. And so at any given time when your exchange is lacking one of those things, you know that you can't fortify the mentoring relationship you need. And that's why the social capital is so important to have, because different people play different roles. They'll come in and out of that network for you with different intensity. And you have to be able to navigate that. But I will say the one thing that I appreciate about all of you, and I really try to do, I think I said someone a text recently, and they're like, how are you keeping track of all these stuff? And I'm like, because I value relationships, right? That is the linchpin of how things get done in my world and in my life. And part of it is that for relationships to work, you have to nurture them, right? And so the other thing I tell people is, yeah, you're going to seek mentors that are super busy. That's never going to change. They're always going to be busy. But if you don't reach out to them, if you don't put something on their calendar, if you don't text them, if you don't talk to them, they're not going to understand what they need and how much they need to pour in so that you and them benefit mutually from that relationship. So that's the other part about seeking a mentor, is your level of courage of not getting in your own head and saying, oh, I'm not going to text. It's going to feel like cringy or creepy or whatever it is that we say about not keeping in touch, not being thoughtful, not engaging in that relationship, because I think it has to be that intentional. And it works both ways, right? When you want that mentoring relationship, but then when you're in the position where you discover whether you have deemed yourself to be that person or not, that person sees you in that role, then you have an obligation. You've got to pour in, right? And then now you've got to contribute to the relationship, because that's what really will foster sort of this change. And I think as women, the part that's really different is that for us, connections have to be deep and meaningful and important. And then we are able to foster, certain realities to come true. But then I'm going to warn against something that I think Elena reminded me once while we were sitting during a brunch. We share a lot of things, and I've come to call her a friend. And we're talking about something. She says, you should call me and we should do this, this, and that. I'm like, I'm just here to have brunch with you. I wasn't trying to make you help me do that. And she's like, people do that all the time. What the hell is wrong with you? You call me and we do this, right? And I think that's the other thing that gets in the way, is that then when we start to value relationships, we think, well, I'm going to be careful how I ask for things, because I don't want that person to think I've overstepped my bounds or I'm using them or whatever. But then that comes back to that vulnerability and that authenticity and that trust to be able to say, I'm going to ask for this because I don't know if I should or shouldn't be asking for this, but I know you have this thing and I need help to do this. Can we make this happen? And the worst thing that's going to happen is that person says, I can't do that, but here's how I can help, or here's how this is going to happen. And that doesn't diminish the relationship or the authenticity of what exists between you. And I think that that's a really important part of this exchange, and where women sometimes can get stuck in the process of moving the relationship along. And the social capital is that we don't want all the great things that happen in vulnerability and intimacy to be confused with the fact that there's going to be a professional transaction on this side of it as well. I don't know if you have anything to share with that, because I think that that's a really important barrier sometimes that gets in the way.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Brenda. I think, when you think about mentoring relationships, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was sort of thought of as this, teacher-student type of relationship, the master and the protege, or whatever nomenclature you choose to use. And in that, I think the thought was, well, I'm the student, whatever this person says, I'm going to listen to, maybe don't question, maybe just take it all in, don't infringe too much on their time. And I think now, as we're, over the last couple of years, certainly the way that we work, the way that we interact has changed dramatically. I think that the way that approach and that thought is really antiquated, because the way that I look at mentoring now, I look at it as it's a symbiotic two-way relationship, right? So if I am now working with this person, and we've decided that now we're going to take this relationship and move it into a mentoring relationship, I think in that exchange, while I am also learning and getting guidance and having this great time with this person, and they're sharing all their experiences, that person as well, once you've established that trust and vulnerability, and you have this, understanding of how you're going to, collaborate together, that person as well should also be able to say, hey, I kind of wanted to pick your brain about something, So there should be a two-way exchange. Someone once told me one of the best mentoring relationships they were in was actually a reverse mentoring relationship, where this person was a senior VP working with a person who was maybe a director or so. And they were leaving the office together, and the SVP had to go to a meeting, but she had such little time and she was planning to commute and take the bus and the train. And her mentee showed her how to use Uber. And she said it was the best thing she got out of a mentoring relationship, was that she learned how to use Uber. And she said that's why it's really important that you also look to seek out what can you learn from that person. You know, as an SVP, maybe you're, 20, 30 years into your career. I'm just guesstimating. And the person that you're mentoring, perhaps they're more newer, more close to the ground of how things are working. And they can provide a lot of insight that maybe someone at that level just doesn't have access to. So I think the best mentoring relationships, it's supposed to be, a two-way street. You should be able to give and ask for what you need in that relationship. But I will say, I do think that a lot of the driving of the relationship should be on the part of the mentee, so schedule those meetings, follow up on things that you said you were going to follow up on. If you said you were going to send them a really great video on something, send it. Make sure you calendar all the meetings. That really is the responsibility of the mentee. And one thing I just wanted to, end off my response with is, just because you have a mentor or a mentoring relationship doesn't mean you're being fast-tracked for any promotional opportunity or any kind of highlight or recognition. That's not what that is. A mentoring relationship is supposed to be meaningful. It's supposed to be fruitful and beneficial to both parties, and it's meant to be longitudinal. I think the best mentoring relationships are longitudinal. They last, they span over time. Brenda and I have been, now friends for a number of years. I've switched jobs in the time that I've known her. I've gotten degrees and published articles, and she's given me a wealth of perspective and awareness that I didn't have before. So our relationship has certainly spanned over time.
Yeah, I have just a quick example of this idea of being hesitant to ask for help because or to be vulnerable in this way. But I had a mentor, or she's still a really has become a good friend of mine. But at the time, she was the only person, again, when I was looking for like connection points, the only person I knew who had also disengaged from high school and went into a doctoral program later in life. And so I sat down with her at a moment of real vulnerability and just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this doctoral program anymore. I'm really overwhelmed by it. It just doesn't, I'm not sure this is the right path. And she helped me she talked me through that. But in the process of that, I learned that I was more interested in writing, not academically, but creatively. And she asked to look at my creative work, which I had never shared with anyone. So that was a real vulnerable moment for me. And then what she ended up doing was sharing that with a friend of hers who was in the publishing field. And so that networking not only helped me deal with a really an issue that was going on in my career, in my life, and but also connected me to someone who eventually became the publisher of the book that I had written. So for me, I learned a valuable lesson in sort of making those connections with your mentors and being vulnerable to them, and not feeling like the relationship is about what they can do for me, and who they're going to connect me to. But sometimes that just happens naturally because you're authentically connecting with another human being. And that was just an important lesson to me.
No, I'm not going to add anything to it. Obviously, I agree with, all of you. Brenda, one, I just want to thank you for choosing to mentor me, mentor all of us. And I'm probably going to flip the switch a little bit and ask you, how do you choose who you spend your time with as a mentor?
So I have the wonderful honor of just having wonderful people who want to be in my presence. So I've been really lucky. Listen, I think anybody who approaches you and says, I'm at a crossroads, I think you can help. If you are a person who gives, then you give, right? The one thing I will say that I've changed a lot lately is that I start to assess if the person is a giver themselves and not just a taker. For me, I'm a giver and I give hard and I'm very committed. And, you know, I find that when I'm around takers, that's very time consuming and I don't receive. And what I would say about all of you and the sort of continuum of my experiences, when people are givers and they show up vulnerable and they need, they give back. And so I think that's become this one little nuance I've changed over the last 4 years. But I have been blessed to be around brilliant women like yourselves. And I want you to know, I never thought of myself as a mentor in this game. I thought I was being mentored the whole time. So I guess this must be the Matrix and I drank the wrong pill, but I think that's how I've approached it. And I appreciate sort of the question. But before we wrap up and as we wrap this up, because we're hitting 12:45 or a little bit over local time, and we're hitting the time for the webinar, what I will say is this. There's a lot to celebrate. When I tell you I'm with brilliant women, I'm not playing. If you want to put a program together around accelerated leadership development in an organization, Cicy is the guru of doing that. She knows how to take people from 0 to 1,000 pretty quickly in a really masterful way. So I want to be able to celebrate that and say that. Alana Beard just got inducted into the Louisiana Hall of Fame with some of the great, athletes. But not only that, has become a business mogul in her own right. And so, just celebrating that is really important to me. And the last thing I will say is that Dr. Santiago's book, Moonlit Vines, is out and wonderful. If you have a young person, if you deal with young people, it is the book that you should be reading this summer, in the next couple of weeks, in the beach, and just taking it all in and sharing with the people that you love. And that is the gift that I get by being with all of you, is I just get to be around brilliant people that I get to celebrate. And I am humbled and awed every time, because believe me, my life is not that spectacular relative to theirs. I am really sort of just grateful and humble that you were all here with me today to talk about this subject. I think that one of the things that you all have taught me is that the pursuit of excellence means that you have to bring people along with you so that you can get really, really exceptional. And I'm blessed that you took me on your journey, and I know that you're on my journey of excellence. And I hope that all of you who have been watching today understand that you too have your own tap to excellence, and you just have to find the right group of people to help you harness and tap into that, so that you can experience the fullness of who you are and your potential. So thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you, my panel, for being a part of this.